Blessed is he who expects nothing, for he shall never be disappointed. Depending on how you view this statement, there is both wisdom and foolishness contained therein. There are times when our expectations exceed the bounds of reason, and other times when our expectations are necessary for growth. A good example of how both can apply to the same expectation is man's desire to fly. The early attempts to have a human being soar above the earth like the birds saw many tragic deaths as attempts were made to only imitate the birds. The strong desire to fly, coupled with determination, allowed us, though, to not only soar above the earth, but to eventually escape the confines of gravity. There was the great expectation that flight was possible. Yes, there were those who expected to fly who were sorely disappointed. But there were others whose expectations paid off. Now, in the realms of achievement, expectations are the driving force behind eventual accomplishment. You have to have this expectation that it can be done and keeps driving you forward and trying to accomplish something. Thomas Edison, for instance, had a driving expectation of making light from electricity. He is credited with discovering 10,000 ways that won't work to make a light bulb. That's a lot of disappointed expectations. However, there is another form of expectation which contributes to many of our problems in human interactions. There are numerous examples of failed expectations and their sad consequences contained in the Bible. We know how Judas expected Jesus to be a military liberator, but realized his mistake too late. His despair at his disappointed expectation caused him to hang himself. We know of Peter, who braggingly proclaimed that he would stay true to the Lord, but collapsed at the finger pointing of a slave girl. Now, there's an interesting story of a ruler who fully expected to be catered to due to his high standing in society, and he became enraged when not shown the deference he expected. In 2 Corinthians chapter 5, we read, Naaman, commander of the army of the king of Syria, was a great man with his master and high in favor, because by him the Lord had given victory to Syria. He was a mighty man of valor, but he was a leper. So Naaman came with his horses and chariots and stood at the door of Elisha's house. And Elisha sent a messenger to him, saying, Go and wash in the Jordan 7 times, and your flesh shall be restored, and you shall be clean. But Naaman was angry, and went away, saying, Behold, I thought that he would surely come out to me, and stand and call upon the name of the Lord his God, and wave his hand over the place, and cure the leper. Now, we don't know for certain, but it is reasonable to assume that Naaman had tried many different ways to be cured of his leprosy. He was, after all, a man of high standing with probably enough wealth to be able to afford the most expensive charlatan. But he was given a word of hope by a slave girl serving Naaman's wife, and he set out to obtain the cure. However, he was not willing to do what was required because he felt he had been insulted by Elisha. Elisha didn't bother to go out to meet this person of high standing, but instead sent a messenger to the nobleman. So I can just hear Naaman. Do you mean to tell me this healer won't come out and show and bow and scrape at my great presence? I've paid a goodly sum for his healing powers, and he just sends a messenger to tell me to do something stupid. No way am I going to put up with this kind of insulting arrogance. Arrogance? Really? Who is actually being the arrogant one in this situation? Is it not Naaman? Did he not have an expectation about how things ought to be done on his behalf? However, his expectations were not met, and his disappointment caused him to become angry. How much of our own angry flare-ups are caused by a disappointed expectation? Now, probably for most, the immediate response would be hardly any. But let's look at our flare-ups from a different angle. Rather than call it a disappointed expectation, let's call it a judgment. How many of our flare-ups are a result of a judgment on our part? It might be a judgment about the other person's incompetence when serving us. We often meet people who are incompetent in their job. There was a time when I had to tell the VA administrator handling my GI Bill, I had to tell him how to do his job. It's a long story, but the short of it is that this person was looking at a series of letters from the VA which seemed to indicate that I did not deserve college assistance. After many back and forths on the phone, I asked him if he was reading the letters within the parameters of the dating continuum of the letters. Nope. He was only reading them as they had showed up on his desk. When they were put in proper order, he saw that I was indeed entitled to my GI Bill assistance for college. Fortunately for me, I was too amazed at such a show of incompetence to get angry. But it is these kinds of situations that can cause the anger to flare. It could be a judgment about what the other person meant with their words. Words have meaning. However, they often have different meanings for different people. You may mean one thing in your statement, and somebody else has a different meaning for that same thing, and there's problems. I recently asked someone to join us for a meal at a restaurant. Before I could finish the invite, I was angrily informed that he doesn't join anything. Okay. While that may seem to be ridiculous in the extreme, we may often misinterpret someone's words and become angry as a result. Now, these are examples of judgments based upon expectations. When our expectation, whether we're conscious of it or not, when that expectation is not met, we form a conclusion about why it happened. And that conclusion almost always is bound up with blame towards the other person. We very seldom begin our first look at how we may have contributed to the problem or the situation. Fortunately for Naaman, he was able to be persuaded to let go of his anger and to reconsider the situation. He had gotten all riled up and angry because he felt his importance had been disregarded. That anger at the apparent insult caused him to forget the purpose of his visit. He had made the journey to be healed, not to be recognized. But he allowed a secondary event to become the primary event in his life at the moment and was about to lose what he actually wanted. How often have we wounded a relationship due to our premature judgment of a person's intent. How often is that premature judgment caused by a perceived insult? And how often is that perceived insult simply the result of our own insecurity? How often does our insecurity lay at the base of our anger? Anger is often a protective response, but do we really need to protect ourselves with an anger that wounds another? Middle schoolers are easily offended when someone calls them a name. When they come crying to the teacher, they will often be asked, "Well, is it true? Are you what they said you are?" Of course not. However, middle school children have not yet become secure in who they are. Sadly, we see many who are past middle age still acting like they were in middle school, getting upset at the slightest perceived insult. Naaman's status as a great man in the Syrian army was not diminished by Elisha's actions. But because Naaman needed everyone to acknowledge his greatness, he was insulted when someone didn't do what he expected. His disappointment almost cost him his healing. As I began, blessed is he who expects nothing, for he shall never be disappointed. Let go of judgment. Let go of judgment about how others are supposed to treat you. Let go of anger when things don't go your way. Let go of any expectation to be recognized. Now, this may sound like a lot of pop psychology, but it's what is contained in the Sermon on the Mount from Jesus. In Matthew chapter 5, "Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy." A merciful person grants the other the benefit of the doubt. Mercy assumes that I might have taken that wrong and they didn't really mean to hurt me. Or, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God." The peacemaker refuses to touch the bone of a contention, but instead looks for ways to maintain the peace. And that often begins with us in not getting angry. Or, Jesus said, "Blessed are you when others revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account." When others do things that make the ordinary person rise up in anger, yet you maintain your calm, you have moved into the kingdom of God, wherein is righteousness, peace, and joy. When it all comes down to a basic natural reality, do we really need the disease-causing benefits of the acid-generated anger that we allow over such insignificant events? I say insignificant because at the end of the day, when you go home still stewing about your treatment at the restaurant, that waitress hasn't a clue and is happily enjoying her time with her family. Let us not be as Naaman and think of ourselves as more important than another. Instead, let us be alert to the endless opportunities to be of service for the needs of others. If we will learn to practice what Paul encourages, we will experience much fewer disappointed expectations. In Ephesians chapter 4, he says, "I urge you to walk in a manner worthy of the calling to which you have been called, with all humility and gentleness, with patience, bearing with one another in love." I would encourage you to just pick one of these characteristics: humility, gentleness, patience, bearing with one another. Pick one of them and practice it for the next month. To see what happens. One of my first teachers in the faith wrote a poem which has greatly influenced my life. He titled it Dying to Self, and I'd like to share it with you. When you are forgotten or neglected or purposely set at naught, and you don't sting and hurt with the insult or the oversight, but your heart is still happy being counted worthy to suffer for Christ, that is dying to self. When your good is evil spoken of, when your wishes are crossed, your advice disregarded, your opinions ridiculed, your best intentions misinterpreted, and you refuse to let anger rise in your heart or even defend yourself, but rather take it all in patient, loving silence, knowing that Christ alone is your defender, that is dying to self. When you patiently bear annoyance, disorder, inconvenience, irregularity, and even impunctuality from others, when you feel your time has been wasted and you've been treated harshly and unfairly, and yet you still respond in love, maintaining your peace and enduring these things with meekness as Jesus endured, that is dying to self. When you are unruffled with less than desirable accommodations, uncomplaining with meager food, difficult climates, rearranged travel schedules, when you maintain cheerfulness even though others are grumpy, when you are loving, kind, and attentive even to those who can do you no benefit by their association, when you remain calm despite interruptions to your agenda and plans by the will of God, that is dying to self. When you don't care to refer to yourself in conversation, when you don't feel the need to boast of your accomplishments and record every good deed you do for the world to see, when you don't itch after commendation and applause, when you don't mind when others are acknowledged and your name is ignored, when you're more concerned with being faithful to God's call, when you are okay to be unknown, that is dying to self. When you see your brother prospering, when you see him succeeding with a project that you contributed to, and yet you can honestly rejoice with him in spirit, being happy to remain behind the scenes, not questioning God, but being grateful that the work is being accomplished so that God is glorified, that is dying to self. When you can receive correction and reproof from one of less stature than yourself, and can humbly submit inwardly as well as outwardly, finding no rebellion or resentment rising up within your heart, that is dying to self. Are you dead yet?